Okay, Victor, do you want to hook up? So Victor Rossi is working on a PhD with Patrick Suzini at IRCAM.
Hello, sorry, got some time to set up. Hello, everyone. Good evening for those on the same latitude as mine. So I wanted to present to you the work I've been doing in the frame of my PhD since the last year's workshop of actor. So as Steve said, I'm doing my PhD at IRCAM, and the main goal of it is to get definitions, acoustic and semantic definitions of timbre attributes of sound. So here I focused on 4 terms that are bright, warm, round, and rough. Oops, okay. To give you some context about my research, I'll cite 2 PhD works that occurred in the same team as mine. The one of Anne Faure in 2000 that reported a diversity of sound descriptions, including for timbre, and the work of Maxime Caron that created a sound lexicon of terms used for sound description, and he tried to give a definition for each term. Well, this sound lexicon is now in development under the name of Speak, and the purpose of that lexicon is to be used in design process for sound design, and in a more educational way for sound creation classes or musical theory classes. So ambiguity remains on the meaning and the use of terms describing timbre, and that is the purpose of my thesis, to try to uncover this ambiguity. So for the last year, I structured my work around interviews with sound experts. And I studied with them 4 terms that are bright, warm, round, and rough. And the goal was to obtain definitions and sound samples for these 4 terms. So why those 4 terms? Well, actually warm and round in French, so they are chaud et rond, are quite similarly used to describe sound. And so it was the core interest of the study. Now, we chose also bright because it's a word that is investigated in many timbre research. And finally, rough because we all know this psychoacoustic definition of roughness. But at some point, in my opinion, I didn't feel like roughness only was described through amplitude modulation. It kind of missed the rubbing noise aspect of what is actually roughness. And I wanted to investigate this polysemic side of the word. So the participants of these interviews were 32 French fluent sound experts. So I had composers, musicians, sound designers, sound engineers, and acousticians. And in order to get the sound samples, I presented to the experts sound dataset, which was a mix of the Studio Online library and the Vienna Symphonic Library. So both are musical instruments databases. And so I chose musical instruments because it allowed me to present a data set of sound with great diversity, with not so much of, how do you say, semantic, I mean, it wasn't environmental sound that can be related to the source too much. It was easier to use musical instruments for that interviews. So, plus we had various playing techniques going along with the library. So all the sounds were loudness normalized, even though I had different dynamics, and all the pitch were octaves of Cs in order to reduce bias on pitch, but still have the difference of timbre for one instrument following the register. So here's the interface I used on MaxMSP to show the different sound samples. So on the left, you have all the instruments. At the top, you have the playing techniques. In the middle, a matrix showing the different sounds that we can listen to. So the interviews were around 2 hours and 10 minutes long. It was structured in 4 parts, 1 part for each term, and every time the order of the interview was permuted for each participant. And for each term, I presented the same questionnaire in 6 points. So the first question was about getting some context for thinking on one particular word. So I would ask the frequency and the context of use of the study term. Then I would ask for a definition of the study term, and then the sound samples, at least 3 of them from the sound data set. And then for the question 4 and 5, I will explore the opposites of the study term by first asking for sound samples and then asking for a definition. The idea behind this is that without that, people would maybe sometimes more easily describe one term by its opposite. And we wanted to see if there was any particular dimensionality of each of the term, like we have, for example, between bright and dark, or but something that we didn't really observe, for example, for warm and round, that seemed to have really many different opposites. Finally, I investigated the affect aspect of the terms. The idea of this question is to stress out the affect part of timbre that can be really important for some terms, and to relocate the affect definition of the study term from the question 2 and 5, because it is quite difficult to find related acoustic correlates to affect aspects. So I went through the semantic analysis of the interviews. First, I transcribed the interviews. Then I focused on the question 2, so the question of the definition. I followed some classic step of NLP here, so tokenization, getting rid of the stop words, and then a lemmatization of my corpus. For that, I used the work of Benoît Sagot that worked on that for French language. And here is an example of these 2 steps for this phrase. So at the end, I would get the frequency of the most occurring words in the dataset used for sound description for the 4 terms. So here are the results in the shape of word cloud. So at the top right, you see the word cloud for bright. So sorry, it's in French, but I will try to walk through all the words that are appearing here. So for bright, you have mostly spectral description of sounds. The top right is the term round, where you can see a strong comparison to the term warm, chaud in French, a description of the attack and also of the spectral features. Same thing for warm at the bottom left, with a lot of spectral features, comparison with round and different metaphorical descriptions. And finally, rough, where you see more maybe temporal aspects of sound, metaphorical aspects related to the sense of touch and matter. So from these results, we wanted to get a better visualization of the description of the terms in order to be able maybe to summarize it and try to formulate definitions. So we ask ourselves, what are the description strategies employed for each term by the experts? And for that, I followed a hypothetical deductive approach in order to do that. So I took some previous works that got interested in the language, the description strategies of timbre and of sound. So there is the work of Porcello with sound engineers, the work of Anfor with musicians and non-musicians, the one from Maxime Caron with composers, sound engineers, and sound designers. And finally, the one from Zachary Walmark on orchestration treaties. So I came up with 10 description strategies. Part of them actually emerged naturally from my corpus. It was the case, for example, in the grade category of acoustic descriptions, I had 4 of them that got naturally from the corpus. So the spectral descriptions, the temporal description, the dynamic related descriptions, and the sound exclusive semantic. By that category, I mean all the words that were primarily used for sound description. In the second grade category of source-related description, you have description of the source that was strongly colored by the data set I was using. And the excitation mode description, so also colored by the data set, because I had all the playing techniques, but also more basic, let's say, excitation modes. Finally, the last grade category was metaphoric description, and it was the most influenced by the previous works. So the first one is the cross-modal correspondence descriptions, that it's all descriptions that use other central modalities like the touch and vision to describe sound. The second one is the category where people would describe sound as matter with shape, density, and specific material. The third one I call effects, because it would be like the sound having an effect on its environment or on the listeners. And finally, the last one, the affect, is all about judgments and emotional value applied to sound. So we validated these 10 categories with my colleagues by doing inter-rater agreement measurements of Fleiss' kappa. And so we validated the use of these 10 categories here. So here are the results. So don't look at the legends because I think they're not quite good, but here you have 4 graphs for the 4 terms that I'm studying. In abscissa, you have the 10 categories, and the ordinates are the percentage of participants that actually express themselves in one category. So for example, for bright, you see that most of all the participants express themselves through spectral aspects to describe brightness, showing that this is a big part of the definition of the term. You see that the same goes for warm and round, except that for round, temporal descriptions was more important than spectral description. For those both terms also, you have more metaphorical description than the 2 other terms. And finally, for rough, you can see that it was mainly described through temporal aspects of sounds, and compared to the 3 other terms, a lot of excitation mode descriptions. So from those results, I tried to formulate definitions for the Forum Acousticum conference that was supposed to take place in April. So I tried to summarize the information, getting the most occurring word in the context of the phrases from the transcriptions, and trying to hierarchize the information with the most used description strategies. And of course, I linked them to the sound samples most occurring at the end of the interviews. So here goes. A bright sound has most of the spectral energy located in the high frequencies. It is often a high-pitched sound that can be composed with a sharp attack. So the 2 sounds that were most occurring here, most cited, were first the glockenspiel played with hard sticks. Hope you hear it. And the trumpet played brassy or ordinario, which is the normal playing technique, in medium high pitched and fortissimo. Next, round sound is temporally unstable. It presents fast temporal variations that can bring some sort of noise. It gives a rubbing, scratching sensation. So in order to select sound sample here, experts mostly focused on the playing techniques instead of the instruments. So the most occurring one was the Flatterzung. For example, for the trumpet, the bassoon with playing the multiphonic playing technique. So for those 2 sounds, we can kind of relate to the psychoacoustic definition of roughness here. But what is interesting is that the sul ponticello that didn't really show this amplitude modulation part of roughness. And I find it really interesting to think roughness, the use of roughness, as being kind of polysemic here. So for warm, a warm sound seems to be a low to mid-low pitch sound. It gives a feeling of spectral richness in the mid-low frequencies. A warm sound has a rather soft attack. It's fairly pleasant sound that gives a sensation of envelopment. So the two sounds that came out of the interviews were first a bass clarinet that has a really deep sound with a breathy sensation due to the fact that it's played pianissimo. The cello, the second sound is quite interesting compared to the other one, because since play vibrato, you have actually more harmonics, and to people that selected this sound, it kind of showed the human part of sound, since you have a more expressive sound, more musical sound compared to the other one. So again, we could from that think that warmth could have a polysemic side of its definition. Finally, a round sound has a soft attack and is temporally stable. It tends to also have a soft release or a long resonance. A round sound is spectrally perceived as full with a spectral balance located in the mid-low frequencies. Sorry, of course, all these definitions were meant to be at first in French because it was all French-based, but I think we talked about linguistic earlier and I had to translate it anyway. So the first kind of sound was kind of sound, you know, with an attack and a resonance. That is the pizzicato of the double bass and the marimba. So here it was mainly in the medium to low frequencies, but still you can see that even a C4, so the note of the marimba, was still perceived as round. So it didn't have to be so restrictive on the low frequencies. And finally, the last sound was the sound of bass tuba, which is different from the other one because it's sustained, but still had this temporal stability and the soft attack. So these are the results I got so far. Now I want to present to you what I'm dealing with right now. So first thing, so we have definitions and sound samples. And well, in order to build more robust definitions, I wanted to reduce and hierarchize the quantity of relevant information I got from the interviews. So I just launched an online questionnaire in order to do that. So I send it to sound experts, and the corpus that they have to put judgment on are phrases extracted from the transcriptions with the most occurring words. Then this second goal is more related to the second part of my study, that is the acoustic definitions of those terms. So the first step would be to annotate the sound data set, which is around 600 sound samples. It's the same that the one I used during the interview. And I'm kind of thinking of a design right now that is based on best word scaling. That is an alternative choice to rating scales and pairwise comparison, because rating scales seems to be a little bit inconsistent for subjective judgments and limited actually. And because of course that pairwise comparison is very time consuming, a bit difficult to imagine in the time of PhD actually. So the final goal of this this method would be to get the acoustic correlates related to the four terms I'm studying. So I'm thinking, since the sound annotation with best word scaling would give a ranking from the most to the least, for example, warm sound, to train a regression model and to get the salient audio descriptors from the most to the least warm sound. So I'm thinking about doing two kinds of inputs here, either spectrograms or audio descriptors. It's still, I mean, the idea of this step is still in the process, and I'm thinking of doing this with a collaboration with some guys in the Liverpool University. So ultimately, we would like to reunite the definitions with the acoustic definitions, the semantic definitions, the acoustic definitions of the four terms in order to test them and to validate them through an experiment. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions or any insights on the work I'm doing right now, I will be happy to answer and listen to it.
Thank you, Victor. So we have Timbre semanticists in the group here. I'm sure they have some questions. Lindsay.
Yeah, this is really interesting work, and thank you for this research. It actually got me thinking a little bit about my findings and my semantic model. And what really interests me about your definitions is that it's a holistic definition of the sound that includes some information about the beginning of the sound, about the middle of the sound, and sometimes about the shape or about the end. And all four of those words were so commonly used in my interviews, and it was just fascinating to see that they didn't actually come out in the wash into the model. And bright is in there because I added it post hoc because it almost made it, and I couldn't imagine the model without bright in it. But I think that kind of gave me insight, your findings, into the idea that maybe the reason it didn't is because the sounds, those are words that describe a number of different factors, and the way that people were characterizing instruments in my study, they needed language that maybe took part of that definition and not the whole thing. So I guess, sorry, I had a question at some point in there somewhere, but I'm just very excited about it. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that, or if that was, it's not surprising to me now that I think about it, that bright is kind of indicative of both this attack thing and this, this qualia thing and all of that. But just what was your kind of experience in putting together those findings?
Well, on the subject of brightness, I think that's an interesting part to talk about the attack, because we still only define brightness about the CGS or the number of harmonics, and I kind of face the fact that people would choose mainly sounds with a fast attack, and that's actually an interesting point that I brought to Chaud. I don't know if you know him, because he actually wrote a paper on the importance of the log attack time on the definition of brightness. And so I think that you would get interested to talk to him about it. But yeah, my feeling about it is that the attack has an influence, the attack time has an influence on brightness.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know if that's your point or not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's just something different. It's a new perspective, I think, for me.
Jason.
Thank you very much, Victor. Very interesting stuff. It seems to me that it has often been a desirable compositional goal for music to be bright and warm at the same time. One of our colleagues at McGill here did his dissertation on the sunrise topic in orchestral music, and an increase of brightness and an increase of warmth simultaneously is one of the features that he would talk about. And if we look just at the spectral accounts anyway of bright and warmth, they seem opposed, brightness being more about upper spectral energy and warmth being about mid or low spectral energy. And so my question is, do you think that it's possible for a single sound to be bright and warm at the same time? Or is that something that might be an emergent property out of combinations of multiple sounds in a thicker orchestration?
Well, as you said, I think that the mixing of those two information would come by blending different kind of instrumental timbres. But well, the sound of the cello we listened to earlier kind of made me think about this duality of the sound that can be actually bright and warm. Although that's something that I asked the experts I was interviewing, since at some point I kind of forced them not to have to, how do you say that, compare the four terms we're studying, just saying that it's terms like taking among others. The point is not to face them in their definitions. But while some people would say to me that a round sound can't be actually bright, a warm sound can, because it has this potential noise granularity that can bring some brightness in the sound. So in my opinion, from what people told me, brightness can also emerge from that, like having this kind of raspy sound that can bring brightness here. But again, I think that having in some playing techniques for musical instruments, you can also assess brightness with a warm sound by adding a lot of, this is really affect related, but adding a lot of musicality in the sound you want to make. If you have the sensation of a homemade sound, you might enhance the brightness feeling. That's my opinion.
Thank you very much.
Matt?
Yeah, let me just get my video on here. I thank you. This is really interesting stuff. And this, this question extends to all of the semantics people, really. But I was a violin maker for a number of years, and the bright, warm, round, rough, these are terms that are very commonly used, almost ubiquitously used in the field to describe timbre and make adjustments and make timbre adjustments on a daily basis to instruments. So I'm wondering if you've tapped into the instrument maker world, and there's a whole group of people that have standardized definitions for these terms that are adjusting timbre on a daily basis. So there's not really so much of a question here as like a whole possible resource for you to tap into. And I believe, from my experience, the terms would at least in French language as well as English have some similarity there in terms of the way that they're used from the makers that I know. But an idea, a possible resource for you to tap?
Sorry, I didn't get exactly your question. Can you repeat it, please?
It's not so much of a question of an opportunity to tap into a resource of the instrument makers. Have you discussed this with instrument makers? That's a group of people that have a refined lexicon, definitions for these terms that I think you would find helpful.
I actually did two of my experts were saxophone beak makers, only the beak, the mouthpiece, sorry. And I had one clarinet player that was a tester at Buffet Crampon. So I think I kind of got a little bit into that environment of making instruments. But yeah, I was interested in interviewing this kind of person, but they actually mostly relate on what the testers tell them. So to me, it wasn't how do you say that? They rely on the knowledge also of the instruments and of the instruments test. So kind of I thought it would be overlapping at some point. And also because I've been working at Buffet Crampon, doing an internship there, I noticed that they don't really describe sound as sound actually, but more about how do they make that sound. I don't know if you, how do you, for example, how do you do make the clarinet in order to have that kind of sound, like talking about the geometry and the mechanical aspects, but not really the acoustic aspect of the sensations. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And in violin making, that's what we do. But we, we'll to accomplish if we want a warmer sound, we know we can do X, Y, and Z to make the sound warmer. And so there's just a possibility to
no, totally, you're right. Yes.
Do we have any other questions? No? Great. Well, thank you much, Victor.